The smell hit me before the sight did. That chemical sting of cheap lighter fluid mixed with the scent of charred meat, drifting over a ridge that was supposed to smell like pine needles and damp earth. I was standing on my back porch, a mug of black coffee halfway to my mouth, staring at the east pasture of my property, 100 acres of rolling grass that I had owned, paid taxes on, and maintained for 20 years. And right there, smack in the middle of my grazing land, was a bouncy castle. I blinked, thinking maybe the early morning sun was playing tricks on my eyes, but no. It wasn't just a bouncy castle. It was a full-blown carnival. There were 3 large white canopy tents, a DJ booth blasting some generic pop music that was already making my teeth ache, and at least 50 people milling around with red Solo cups, parking their SUVs on the soft soil I had just reseeded last fall. But the cherry on top of this insanity sundae was standing on a hay bale. My hay bale, by the way, holding a microphone. It was Linda Prentice, the president of the Silver Creek Heights Homeowners Association. She was wearing a pristine white blazer that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of a working cattle ranch, and she was shouting, "Welcome, neighbors, to the first annual Community Unity Barbecue," as if she hadn't just led an invasion force onto private land. Now, a younger version of me might have grabbed a shotgun or called the cops immediately. But I'm a structural engineer by trade, retired now to ranching. And if there's one thing engineering teaches you, it's that you don't just swing a hammer at a crack in the foundation. You find out what caused it, and then you dismantle the whole house if you have to. I didn't yell. I didn't run down there screaming. I just walked to my ATV, the gravel crunching under my boots, and drove down the hill, dust curling behind me like a storm warning. When I pulled up to the edge of the crowd, the audacity of it was breathtaking. They had set up charcoal grills directly upwind of my barn. Kids were chasing each other through the fence rails where my horses, a herd of 15 quarter horses led by a mare named Bessie, who didn't suffer fools lightly, were pacing nervously. Their ears were pinned back, nostrils flaring. They hated the noise, and they hated the intrusion. I killed the engine and stepped off. Linda spotted me immediately. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look embarrassed. She beamed at me, that wide, shark-like smile that politicians use right before they raise your taxes. "Caleb," she chirped, her voice amplified by the PA system, echoing off the canyon walls. "So glad you could finally join us. We saved you a burger." I walked right up to the hay bale, ignoring the plate she tried to thrust at me. "Linda," I said, keeping my voice low and even, the kind of tone you use when you're trying not to startle a spooked animal. "You're trespassing. This is private property. You need to pack this up. Now." She laughed, a tinkling, condescending sound that grated on my nerves. She actually patted my arm. "Oh, Caleb, don't be such a curmudgeon. Technically, you're mistaken. The HOA board voted last month to update the community boundary map. This pasture is now designated as shared green space for community enrichment. Didn't you get the newsletter?" I stared at her. I've heard of people moving property lines by a few inches, but she was claiming 20 acres. "Linda," I said, "you can't vote to steal land. That's not how property deeds work. Unless you have a signature from me and a stamp from the county clerk, this is still my land." She waved a hand dismissively, turning back to her guests. "We're all neighbors here, Caleb. Let's not get bogged down in bureaucracy. Just enjoy the party. But hey, if you're going to stay, could you move that ATV? It's ruining the aesthetic for the photos." That was the moment. That was the click in my brain where the switch flipped from annoyed neighbor to tactical warfare. I looked at the grill flaring up 10 feet from a stack of dry winter feed. I looked at her teenage son throwing empty soda cans at Bessie, who was stomping her hoof in warning. I looked at the Community Unity banner zip-tied to my fence posts. "All right, Linda," I said, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. "I'll move the ATV. Just a word of advice. My guests usually come out to this pasture around sunset for their evening run. They can be a little rowdy. You might want to be gone by then." She rolled her eyes. "Guests? You don't have guests, Caleb. You live like a hermit. We'll be fine." "Okay," I said softly. "Don't say I didn't warn you." I drove back up the hill, parked on the porch, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. I sat there for 3 hours, watching them disrespect every inch of that pasture. They let their dogs run off leash, chasing my barn cats. They played music so loud my windows rattled. It was an occupation, plain and simple. But I knew something they didn't. That pasture wasn't just a field. It was the evening turnout for the herd. And my horses, well, they were creatures of habit. They knew that when the sun hit the ridge line, the electronic gate from the stable opened, and they got to run. Usually, I opened it manually. Today, I decided to let the automatic timer do its job. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. The party was in full swing. Linda was leading a karaoke rendition of Sweet Caroline, screeching into the mic. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I needed documentation. I zoomed in on the chaos, the trash, the lack of safety around the fires. And then I checked the time. 6:45 p.m. Click. Down at the stable, about 300 yards from the party, the heavy magnetic lock on the main gate disengaged with a loud clank that echoed across the valley. The music stopped for a second as heads turned. Then came the sound. If you've never heard 15,000 pounds of horseflesh accelerating on hard-packed dirt, it sounds like thunder rolling inside a tunnel. Bessie led the charge, as she always did, eager to get to the fresh grass on the east side, exactly where Linda had set up the buffet table. They crested the small rise and saw the crowd. Now, a spooky horse might turn around. But these were ranch horses. They weren't scared of people. They were annoyed by them. And they were hungry. They didn't trample anyone. Horses are actually very good at not stepping on things they don't want to hurt. But they didn't slow down, either. They flowed through that party like a river breaking a dam. I watched through my camera lens as chaos erupted. A folding table loaded with potato salad was knocked sideways by a passing flank. The DJ screamed and dove behind his speakers as thunder, my gelding, hopped over a cooler full of ice. People were scrambling, dropping hot dogs, diving into the bouncy castle for protection. One of the horses, a cheeky paint named Patches, stopped right in front of Linda, sniffed the punch bowl she was guarding, and knocked it over with his nose before trotting off. Linda stood on her hay bale, screaming, "Stop them! Someone call animal control. This is assault." I just zoomed in on her face. It was a masterpiece of terror and indignation. When the herd finally settled down at the far end of the pasture to graze, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake, the partygoers didn't stick around. They grabbed their kids, abandoned their folding chairs, and sprinted for their cars. I drove down slowly as the last SUV peeled out of the dirt. Linda was standing amidst the wreckage of her event, trembling. Red wine spilled all down the front of her white blazer. "You," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this on purpose. You could have killed someone." "I warned you, Linda," I said, leaning on the handlebars of my ATV. "I told you my guests arrive at sunset. You chose to ignore it. Now, you've got about 20 minutes of daylight left to clean up this trash, or I'm charging you a hazmat disposal fee." She let out a scream of frustration that sent the crows flying from the telephone wires, turned on her heel, and marched to her car. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought surely the humiliation would be enough. But I underestimated the sheer, gravitational density of Linda Prentice's ego. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy rolled up my driveway. It was Miller, a good guy I'd known for years. He looked tired. "Morning, Caleb," Miller said, tipping his hat. "Got a complaint from the HOA. Says you unleashed wild beasts on a community gathering. Claims you endangered children and caused emotional distress." Wild beasts. I laughed, gesturing to the pasture where Bessie was currently napping in the sun. "Miller, those horses have better manners than half the people at that party. And as for the gathering, they were trespassing. Look at this." I handed him the photos of the damage to the grass, the fire pit near the hay, and the video of the stampede showing the horses avoiding people while people ran into each other. "She claims this is community land," Miller said, looking at his notes. She showed me a map. "That map is a fairy tale," I said. "Come inside." We went into my study, and I pulled out the official plat maps, my deed, and the county survey from 6 months ago. The boundary line was clear. The HOA ended at the creek. My land started at the bank. Miller nodded. "I figured as much. But she's threatening to sue the department if we don't cite you. I'm going to write this up as a civil dispute, Caleb. But watch your back. She's on the warpath." That night, I sat down and really looked at the document Linda had flashed at me, or at least the copy she had emailed to the sheriff, which he kindly forwarded to me. It was a map of the development, but the boundary line had been crudely photoshopped. The official stamp in the corner was pixelated. The font used for the county clerk's signature was Comic Sans. It was a forgery, a bad one. And that's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with an annoying neighbor. I was dealing with a criminal. I could have gone to the cops right then, but I wanted more. I wanted to make sure that when the hammer dropped, it dropped so hard she'd never climb out from under it. I called my lawyer, Sarah, a woman who eats HOA bylaws for breakfast. Let her dig, Sarah said when I told her the plan. Document everything. If she claims jurisdiction, let her prove it in writing. We need her to commit to the lie. 2 days later, the letters started arriving. Official-looking envelopes from the Silver Creek Heights Governance Committee. Notice of violation, unsafe livestock. Fine, $500. Notice of violation, noise disturbance, ATV. Fine, $200. Notice of violation, failure to maintain community green space. Fine, $1,000. I didn't pay them. I framed them. I hung them on the wall of my office like hunting trophies. Then came the escalation I was waiting for. A flyer appeared in the neighborhood mailboxes. My neighbor, Tom, a nice guy who just wanted to grow his tomatoes in peace, brought it over. You need to see this, Caleb, Tom said, looking nervous. The flyer read, Community Safety Seminar. Location, the East Pasture, Community Shared Space. Topic, protecting our families from negligent ranching. Saturday, 2 p.m. She was doubling down. She wasn't just trespassing. She was hosting a seminar on my land to tell people how terrible I was. It was so bold I almost admired it. Almost. Saturday came. I was ready. I had moved my own cameras, high-definition game cams, to 3 hidden locations around the pasture. I wanted every angle covered. At 2 p.m., the caravan arrived. This time, it wasn't a party. It was a protest. Linda led the charge, holding a bullhorn. About 30 people followed her, looking nervous but riled up by her rhetoric. They set up folding chairs in a semicircle. Linda stood in front of a whiteboard she had dragged out there, drawing diagrams of how my fences were illegal. I watched from the barn, checking the monitors. He thinks he can intimidate us. Linda's voice drifted up the hill. He thinks he owns this land just because he puts a fence on it. But the charter says this is ours. We need to reclaim our safety. She was working them into a frenzy. It was time to make an appearance. I walked down the hill, not on the ATV this time, but on foot. I walked slowly, calmly. As I got closer, the crowd quieted down. They looked at me, then at Linda. Linda, I said, stopping 10 feet away. I'm going to ask you one last time. Take your whiteboard, take your friends, and get off my property. This is not your property, she screamed, her face turning a mottled red. We voted. The board approved the annexation. You can't annex my ranch, Linda, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. That's stealing. Show him, she yelled to her vice president, a mousy guy named Gary. Show him the map. Gary fumbled with a clipboard and held up the fake map. See? Linda gloated. Certified by the county. Gary, I said, looking him in the eye. Did you verify that map with the county clerk? Or did Linda just give it to you? Gary blinked. He looked at Linda, then at the paper. Well, Linda said she handled the filing. She lied to you, Gary, I said. And right now, you're all accomplices to criminal trespassing and harassment. Don't listen to him. Linda shrieked. He's dangerous. He's unstable. He releases wild animals on children. And that's when she made her fatal mistake. She picked up a rock. A jagged piece of river rock the size of a baseball. Get out, she screamed, and she threw it. Not at me. At Bessie, who was grazing near the fence line, minding her own business. The rock hit Bessie in the flank. The mare squealed, reared up, and kicked out, shattering a slat of the wooden fence. The crowd screamed and scrambled back. That was it. The line was crossed. I pulled out my phone. Sheriff Miller. I said into the receiver, never taking my eyes off Linda. You better get down here. We have an assault. And bring the transport van. While we waited for the law, Linda tried to rally her troops, but the mood had shifted. They had seen her throw a rock at a horse. They saw the crazy in her eyes. People started folding up their chairs and drifting away, ignoring her commands to stay and hold the line. When Miller arrived, he didn't come alone. He brought a county investigator named Mark. Mark was a man who had zero sense of humor and a deep love for paperwork. Mrs. Prentice, Mark said, walking straight up to her. We've received some interesting documents regarding a map you filed, or rather, pretended to file. Linda went pale. It was a clerical error. And the fines you levied against Mr. Dalton? Mark asked. Using an HOA seal for an organization he doesn't belong to? That's fraud, ma'am. Wire fraud, since you mailed them. And, Sheriff Miller added, Mr. Dalton here sent me a video of you throwing a projectile at livestock. In this state, interfering with agricultural animals is a felony. Linda looked around for support, but her neighbors, the people she claimed to be leading, were standing back, recording everything on their phones. She was alone. I was protecting the community, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. You were protecting your ego, I said. They didn't arrest her right there. White-collar crime takes a minute to process, but they did serve her with a cease and desist order that was so thick it made a thud when Miller handed it to her. The fallout was spectacular. I sued the HOA for damages, trespassing, and harassment. But I didn't stop there. My lawyer, Sarah, subpoenaed their financials. It turned out the shared green space initiative was a cover. Linda had been using HOA funds to pay a consultant to redraw the maps, a consultant that turned out to be her brother-in-law. The court date was brief. Linda's lawyer tried to argue good faith misunderstanding. My lawyer played the video of the rock throwing and showed the forged map with the Comic Sans font. The judge, a woman who looked like she'd been carving justice out of granite for 40 years, actually laughed when she saw the map. Mrs. Prentice, the judge said, peering over her glasses. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed, I have seen stupidity, and I have seen arrogance. Rarely do I see all three packaged so neatly in one defendant. The gavel came down hard. Linda was removed from the HOA board and banned from holding any officer position in any community organization in the county for life. She was ordered to pay $15,000 in restitution for the damage to my pasture and fences, plus my legal fees. And, as a special cherry on top, the judge ordered 500 hours of community service. Real community service. Not organizing galas. Picking up trash along the highway. I drove by her a few weeks later. She was wearing an orange vest, holding a grabber tool, spearing soda cans out of a ditch. I slowed my truck down just enough. She looked up. Our eyes met. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just tipped my hat and kept driving. The neighborhood changed after that. With the tyrant gone, the fear evaporated. Tom came over a few days later with a six-pack of beer. We're really sorry, Caleb, he said, handing me a cold one. She made us think you were the monster. She said if we didn't back her, our property values would tank. It's okay, Tom, I said. Fear makes people do stupid things. Just, next time check the map yourselves. A month later, I decided to do something I swore I'd never do. I hosted an event. I put up a simple sign at the end of my driveway. Open Ranch Day. Come meet the herd. Please leave your bouncy castles at home. I didn't know if anyone would show, but by noon, there were 50 people on my lawn. This time, they parked on the gravel where I asked them to. They asked permission before petting the horses. They brought apple pie and coleslaw, and nobody tried to charge me a fee for eating it. I saw Gary, the mousy VP, standing by the fence, feeding a carrot to Bessie. He looked over at me, terrified I was going to kick him out. She likes the tops, I said, walking over. Don't hold it flat. She'll nip your fingers. Gary smiled, relieved. Thanks, Caleb. This is nice. Yeah, I said, looking out over the pasture where kids were running with the dogs, not chasing them. This is what community actually looks like. It's not about drawing lines on a map and forcing people to stand behind them. It's about opening the gate when people know how to ask. The sun began to set, casting that golden light over the valley. The horses, sensing the time, started to drift toward the east pasture. But this time, they didn't stampede. They walked through the crowd, gentle as lambs, weaving between the neighbors who reached out to touch their flanks. It was peaceful. It was respectful. It was everything Linda tried to force and failed to achieve. I stood on my porch as the last cars pulled away, the silence of the ranch returning, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt restored. So, here's the thing I want you to take away from this. We all have a Linda in our lives. Someone who thinks rules are for other people, who thinks boundaries are just suggestions, and who mistakes loudness for leadership. When you meet them, and you will, don't just get angry. Get smart. Document everything. Know your rights. And for God's sake, don't let them redraw your map. But I'm curious, have any of you ever had a neighbor try to claim your property as their own? How did you handle it? Did you lawyer up, or did you let the wild beasts handle it? Let me know in the comments below. I've got a lot of free time now that I'm not fighting the HOA, and I'd love to read your stories. Stay safe, keep your fences mended, and remember, good fences make good neighbors, but only if everyone agrees on where the fence actually is. Thanks for listening.